So today I have the pleasure of having Dr. Wesley Willis on Living Passionately with Pat Browne. I've known Wesley for quite some time. Wesley is also, besides being a psychologist, he's also a nurse, and I see you are cardiovascular nurse is his specialty. And you also teach now, right, Wesley?
Yes.
Also teaches, so out here doing some wonderful things in nursing. And as many of you know, I'm also a nurse recruiter. I have my nursing agency. I've worked with Wesley before when I worked as a travel nurse recruiter. We've had some experiences together, always well wanted. Every hospital you worked at, they wanted to keep you, Wesley.
Yes.
I remember that. They always wanted to keep you, but welcome to the show. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to come on here and talk. But I'm going to have you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about what you do in your field.
Okay. Well, like you had already mentioned, I'm a licensed psychologist, a licensed clinical social worker, and a registered nurse. I've been in healthcare healthcare surrounding fields for over 20 years. I love what I do, whichever hat that I get to wear for that particular day, that particular week, and that particular person's life for me. So right now, I currently own and founder of my own mental health organization where I have several therapists who work for me, who work for the organization, providing therapy in the virtual health space. And I am so excited about this new landscape that we're working in and now learn to embrace as a regular part of healthcare delivery. And yeah, I moved from New York City to Atlanta in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, and just kind of like experiencing a new place in life. Atlanta is a growing and like burgeoning, urban metropolitan sprawl outside of New York City. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Definitely. Well, congrats on the growth of your business. That's awesome. I didn't realize you had therapists now working on the youth, so congratulations on that. Now, do you think that shifted because of COVID and what so many people went through?
Oh, yes, very much so. I mean, I remember when I started doing virtual delivery of mental health, like a lot of people, therapists, other clinicians were very skeptical about it. Patients were even very skeptical about the efficacy of it, the delivery of it, if it was reasonable and feasible. Then in comes the pandemic 2 years after I was only doing all virtual, and I had therapists calling me, clinicians calling me like, Wesley, can you help me set up my program or set up my own practice so that it's interactive? So I'm not just sitting there talking to a camera because my practice is very, very interactive. We do worksheets together, we do games together, we do different breathing techniques, and it requires like cameras and technology. So yes, COVID really kind of like helped like really open up this kind of like way of delivering care.
Yeah. I know I have a dear friend who's also a therapist, and her business has also grown exponentially also. She's so busy, we can never really get together to do any fun thing anymore because she's like, oh, I have patience. So I understand, but it is so much needed. The COVID did a number on us. I know for myself, I had to get some therapy too, because it was just not even making a miss, but it's like afterwards it hit you like, what just happened here? So are a lot of your patients nurses? Or
a good number of my patients are nurses. I would gather to say about 45% at this point now are nurses. I've had during COVID, I had about 65-70% of my patients were nurses because they see, when they find you online, they see the RN after your name, which is really comforting, and like, you're like, okay, you'll get it. You won't just pacify me and say, something like, oh, it's going to be okay. No, you understand when you understand and the experience that I'm having. So yeah, so now it's dwindled down. in terms of the number, but I still think it's like I said, 45% of my population are nurses.
Okay, that's great. And it's great to hear that nurses are getting the help that they need also, because I think that sometimes people forget that nurses are human too. And I've heard that nurses are also the worst patients because they're so used to taking care of everyone else. They put themselves on the back burner. So it's great to hear that nurses are also seeking care, because I know this was hard on a lot of you guys out there.
Yes. I worked in the pandemic. So up until March of last year. So I get it.
I remember, thank you for making that sacrifice. I remember, we had some phone calls, and I would sometimes get calls from other nurses at nighttime. So let's thank you guys and the whole population for what you guys did. It's like more than being heroes, I mean, you'll take that lightly, but you guys really made a huge sacrifice and commitment at that time. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I was reading recently a survey now that said that the nursing industry has really changed a lot since then. And I know from my own experience in recruiting, I've seen that. So from your perspective as a nurse, how have you seen that change?
So I've seen it go from, I remember the first time I had a patient to pass. I had already been a nurse for 2 years when I had my first patient to die.
Oh, wow.
These nurses are graduating, getting their first job in still in orientation with patients who are very sick and incredibly complex. And having to witness that when you're still so new in your career, I think is like changing. And I think so, just kind of like that whole experience, patients being so much more complex. I mean, like I said, I remember it's crazy when somebody's like, oh my goodness, you were a med-surg nurse and you had 15 patients. But the reality is then patients weren't that sick. My patients either probably had some blood sugar, they needed to like have some insulin, get their insulin regular, they had high blood pressure. These patients are on med-surg units on like oxygen and on like respirators and on machines. I mean, I didn't learn how to read a heart monitor machine until I was a nurse for quite some time. So I think the way that nurses are now required to like really walk into and really embody and be ready to manage some very chronically and acutely ill patients is so different. So I think that is different. I think you have, again, kind of like not just being a nurse, but being a nurse executive and nurse leader. I feel that our nurse leaders are also incredibly like under a gun where they're trying to, manage brand new nurse directors, clinical nurse managers, prepare them in ways that they didn't have to before. I think the average age of like nurse managers used to be in their 50s. Now you got nurse managers who are in their 30s with very, few years of experience. And you have a CNO trying to man that ship, with these new nurse leaders. It's so very different. Healthcare is a very different beast today after the pandemic.
Wow. So what would you say to someone that wants to get into nursing? How would you, especially as a educator now, what would you say to what do you say to your students?
Because there was this recent conversation that I was involved in with like a ton of nurse leaders, from Optum Health, is the realization that nursing is so much bigger than it used to be. Now we have nurse informatics. We have not just nursing informatics, we have nurse consultants. Nursing is a huge, huge, huge profession where so many titles you can have and still have the title of a nurse. So don't get into like this lens of the idea that I have to be a caregiver in this kind of traditional sense. Know that nursing is such a valuable profession that we're needed in so many different facets of life.
Right. And you can definitely start off as a med surgeon, then go off into so many different areas. That's great advice. So you don't have to stay at the bedside. There's a lot more to do. You don't have to be a nurse for 30 years and then retire, right? You can do
right,
so
exactly.
much more. Another interesting statistic that I saw recently is that 39% of nurses feel dissatisfied with their current jobs. And this is from nurse.org. How do you feel about that? Do you hear that from your nurse colleagues?
Yeah, I do. I hear from like my nurse colleagues who are at the bedside. I hear from, nurse executives and nurse leaders who are trying to kind of combat the kind of like exodus, continuous revolving door that feels like is happening in nursing. So yeah, I think that is a very, very real percentage and representation of what's happening right now, how nurses feel about nursing.
Right. Do you think that that's because of the nurse shortage that continues around the U.S.? Do you think that's leading to a lot of this dissatisfaction?
I think it's the nurse shortage that's a part of it. I think that most of us who went into nursing with this idea that we're going to help somebody, that we're going to save people. And the reality is you're going into sometimes a profession where I remember at the pandemic when we were told, just do the best that you can. When that's your message and you're like, hold up, what are you telling me? Just do the best that I can, not, be this Florence Nightingale that I thought I was going to graduate into being, that I'm helping like somebody's sick parent, but that I'm now just being told like, you can only do but so much. I think that kind of like what we call moral injury that happens. Now I have to reimagine myself as somebody else, not this person that I was told, like I'm following my grandmother, I'm following in my mother's footsteps of saving somebody, that I just can only do what I can do. And then that's it. And to be okay with that. I think that the other part of that is just kind of like how we treat each other in healthcare is still a challenge. Doctors and nurses don't treat each other well, let alone kind of like what happens, in our own profession, how we treat each other, So I think that what I would like to try to see is as we try to work on increasing like emotional intelligence, the own kind of like internal sense of reward. So not looking for somebody else to pat us on the back, just being my own internal idea that I can reward myself for a job well done, even if I don't get that. And also how we do it intercollegially, what we call like internal customer service, how we treat each other. So let's stop the conversation about like, oh, I can't wait till I leave this job. Let's talk about like, hey, you know what, Susan, I really appreciate the way that you came and you helped my patient. Her light was on. I know I was stuck in a room and stuff like that. We don't really do a good job of that, of rewarding each other. So I think that if we can start kind of like embodying these things, that we will see a greater sense of satisfaction within our profession.
That sounds really great, but how do you think you can go about getting that message across that we really need to be there? Like, what would you say to the nurses that listen and hear this video?
I would say that starts with, starting with this in schools of nursing, where we start kind of like teaching kind of like this soft skill of emotional intelligence, and kind of like self-reward to one another, to speak nicely to one another, to congratulate one another for a job well done, even if you don't get the Daisy Award or you don't get the Employee of the Month Award, that reward needs to come internally, and it can come from, our colleagues. The healthcare system is a business. It's a business, and it's in the business of taking care of patients, and that's what we're also there for. And we can kind of get lost in the shuffle. So I think for a nurse hearing this is to recognize the things that your colleagues do, recognize the things that for yourself that you do, and to take care of yourself.
Right. I agree with you. I remembered when I worked in a hospital many years ago, I worked as a staffing coordinator. And that hospital had a feeling of a family environment. Like the nurses, they really looked out for each other. They had like potluck, and they would do things like the new nurses that graduated that were coming to the hospital. Like they were like, come on, I'm going to teach you. And the new nurses were so eager to learn. you know, but that seemed to have changed quite a bit. Like I read in some of the nurses groups I'm in on Facebook, and so many of them are ready to give up nursing. And I think it's so sad. Like, it takes a lot to become a nurse. It's not an easy path to become a nurse, and then to go through those 4 years, and 3 or 4 years later, you're like regretting or questioning, is this the right thing for you? Like, how do you go back and find that excitement within you, or whatever it was, like you said, your grandma or your mom that was a nurse that motivated you to become a nurse? How do they stay motivated? What can, I don't know, nurse leaders, management in the hospital?
I think one of the things that is really helpful nowadays is that there are so many nurses that are graduating and going into their specialty. No longer is that idea like, oh, I have to graduate and go into med surg. If you know that med surg is not where your heart tells you want to be, and you want to be in psych, go into psych. You know, go into psych. Go find that joy, that passion, as opposed to kind of like saying, oh, I was told, you know, because I was told that I had to go to med surg nursing, and I did it for 5 years. Don't get me wrong. What helped me through was I had some amazing family. Even though I was taking care of 15 patients at night in the South Bronx, I had the most amazing coworkers. It was a family. You know, there was nothing that was going on with my patient that my other 2 colleagues who also had 15 patients didn't know what's going on. I think that the other part is, I wish that they would bring back more of our nurse techs, because our nurse techs was so amazing. They were like my eyes and ears, and they were like, I mean, I get it that we got into this idea that we want more nurses on the floor, more RNs on the floor, but we took away those nurse techs who really, really are kind of like such amazing caregivers.
Yeah.
So I think if somebody is trying to like find like what it is that inspired them, I encourage them to find your niche in nursing, your niche in nursing that makes you be recommitted. So if that's not, like I said, med surg nursing, that's not for you, there's home care nursing. You know, you can go to patients' home. You can help patients with their dressings in the home. And it helps you kind of like, again, make the same amount of money. You're working in the community, seeing a change with the help folks in your community. So there's so many things that you can do. It doesn't just have to stop because you don't like working in the hospital.
Right. You can still have that compassion and empathy that you feel for your nurses in the hospital. That's true. That's great advice as usual. Thank you so much, Wesley. That's awesome. And one other thing I was going to say to you, but despite all of this, the same report that I came across, 60% of nurses said they still enjoy being a nurse, like wholeheartedly at the end of the day. With everything that's going on, they still enjoy that nursing. They want to do it. It is just the challenges that come with it. So I really hope that someone hears this and that they're really encouraged today with your message that you've given them, and a nurse administrator that is listening, that they try to, you know, do the best by their nurses. You know, they're going through a lot. They've gone through a lot, and to know that nurses are feeling this way, we have to do better at really encouraging them and making sure that they have the tools that they need and the support to be successful. So if you can leave us with one message today, Wesley, what would that be?
Just one message. I would say that one message would be just to stay encouraged, you know, because this is the world that we are living in is so different than one that we grew up in or thought that it was going to be. And that kind of like taking care of yourself is in part an important part of staying encouraged. So taking care of yourself, looking after yourself, checking in with yourself, journaling, diary writing, till that it doesn't feel like all these emotions are swallowing you whole. That would definitely be my message. Thank you so much. Guys, you've heard it from Dr. Wesley Willis, aka the nurse doc, you know, out here always giving his best. So thank you so much for being here. And I really hope that
someone, I know that someone or ones will be encouraged by your message today. Thank you, Dr. Willis.
My pleasure, Pat.